Have you ever noticed how some people seem to have almost supernatural control over their emotional lives? They don't despair when they're alone, don't beg for attention, don't transform into unrecognizable versions of themselves when they fall in love. They simply exist, whole, complete, radiating an energy that doesn't depend on external validation. And then there's the rest of us. We who have been conditioned to believe that being in love is synonymous with being alive. We who have turned love into a drug, a desperate escape from the emptiness we carry within. But what if I told you that all of this frantic search for someone to complete us, is the biggest lie ever sold to you? What if what we call romantic love is actually the most well-disguised prison that modern society has ever invented? Stop for a moment and think honestly. Do you want to love? Or do you want to be saved? Because there's a brutal difference between these two things. A difference that determines whether you'll live free or spend your entire life being an emotional slave to other people. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you already suspects the truth. Something in you already understands that this desperate thirst for love might be exactly what's preventing you from experiencing real love. And today, using revolutionary insights from thinkers like Erich Fromm, Carl Jung, and others, we're going to deconstruct this illusion that has kept millions of people trapped in toxic relationships, emotional dependency, and an infinite cycle of neediness disguised as romance. Prepare yourself, because what you're about to discover in the following pages will completely transform your perspective on love, relationships, and most importantly, about yourself. The conditioning that destroys your ability to love. Since you first opened your eyes to this world, you've been bombarded with a specific narrative about love. Disney movies whispered in your ears that you're a half, searching for your other half. Popular romances painted pictures of people who only feel complete when they find the right person. Entire society conspired to convince you that you're insufficient alone. But let me explain something that perhaps no one has told you with this clarity. This conditioning wasn't an accident. It was systematic programming that transformed entire generations into emotional consumers. People who buy and sell feelings as if they were products on a shelf. Just like Neo had to choose between the blue pill and the red pill, you now have two options. Blue pill. Close this video now and return to your life, believing that romantic love is about finding your other half. Continue pursuing relationships that leave you needy, anxious, and emotionally dependent. Red pill. Continue this video until the end and discover what the matrix of romantic love is hiding from you, and how to free yourself from the emotional dependency that keeps you trapped in cycles of suffering. Spoiler alert. It may be painful to discover that you've been programmed to be an emotional consumer, but it will be liberating when you finally manage to love without needing to be saved. Only subscribe to the channel if you're willing to question everything you've learned about love to build truly free and healthy relationships. You were taught that loving means needing, that romance means dependency, that passion means obsession, and this conceptual confusion is at the root of practically all emotional suffering you've ever experienced in relationships. Erich Fromm, psychoanalyst and humanistic philosopher, spent decades studying this distortion. For him, what modern society calls love rarely has anything to do with true love. Love is not an easy feeling for anyone, regardless of their degree of personal maturity. It requires discipline, concentration, patience, faith, and overcoming narcissism, wrote Fromm in his seminal work, The Art of Loving. Translating in more direct terms, truly loving is not falling in love with someone who makes you feel special. It's choosing someone every day, even when the initial enchantment disappears. It's knowing how to be alone and still choosing to be with the other. Do you see the difference? The first is about what you can receive. The second is about what you can give. The first makes you an emotional beggar. The second transforms you into a source of abundance. Fromm identified that most people confuse being in love with loving. Being in love is a chemical explosion of idealization. Loving is a conscious human construction. And here's the crucial point that's going to hurt. Most people prefer the fantasy because reality requires effort, personal growth, and mainly the courage to look at their own wounds without expecting someone else to heal them. You know that sensation of butterflies in your stomach that we romanticize so much?
Neurologically, it's indistinguishable from anxiety.
That feeling of not being able to live without the person. It's literally a symptom of chemical dependency. Your brain is being flooded with dopamine, oxytocin, and other substances that create an altered state of consciousness. Not much different from a drug. But there's something even deeper happening here. Something that few understand. It's a society of disposable love. We live in an extraordinary era of human history. It's never been easier to connect with other people. Dating apps promise to find your soulmate with a few swipes on the screen. Social networks offer instant validation through likes and comments. Technology should have made love more accessible, more authentic, more satisfying. So why have people never been so lonely? Why do depression and anxiety rates skyrocket precisely in the era of hyperconnectivity? Why have lasting relationships become an almost mythical rarity? The answer is simple and devastating. We've turned people into emotional products. Zygmunt, Bauman, Polish sociologist, coined the term liquid love to describe this phenomenon. In his book Liquid Love, on the frailty of human bonds, Bauman observes that currently bonds don't have the guarantee of permanence, and that the ties possibly established are loose, and coldness becomes the specter that haunts the will for effective commitment. You sell yourself through carefully edited photos, biographies, optimized to impress, implicit promises of happiness and fulfillment. And when the other stops offering you the dopamine you seek, you simply unmatch and look for the next emotional hit. Love became a market, and in this market, you are simultaneously a seller and product. Fromm had already predicted this decades before dating apps. He warned that in a society where everything is consumption, even love becomes a commodity. Love in most cases is not proof of maturity, but the expression of a neurotic need for fusion with the other. Think with me for a moment, how many times have you found yourself altering your behavior, your opinions, even your personality to become more attractive to someone? How many times have you pretended to be someone you weren't because you were afraid the person would lose interest in who you really are? This isn't love. This is personal marketing disguised as romance. And the cruelest part is that this dynamic creates a vicious cycle. The more you try to sell yourself, the more you lose contact with who you really are. The more you seek external validation, the emptier you feel internally. The more you try to control how others perceive you, the less authentic you become. Carl Jung, Swiss psychiatrist and former Freud collaborator, called this living through the persona, the mask we wear to be socially sexable. Jung diverged from Freudian psychoanalysis precisely because he understood that human problems went far beyond sexuality. They were rooted in the loss of contact with our deep authenticity. When you live through a mask, you attract people who fall in love with the mask, not with you. And then you get trapped in a relationship where you need to maintain constant performance, where any moment of vulnerability or authenticity becomes a threat to the love you supposedly share. But there's something even darker behind this dynamic, something most people never notice. What is the collective neurosis of romantic love? Have you ever stopped to think why our society is literally obsessed with love stories? Why do we spend billions of dollars on movies, books, music, and products that sell the same basic fantasy, that finding the right person will solve all your problems? The answer will shock you. Because most people are desperately fleeing from themselves. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, was one of the first to identify that what we call romantic love often serves as a psychological defense against deeper anxieties. For Freud, love was revealed when an individual desired to give and receive protection, admiration, and satisfaction from another person. But this could easily transform into an attempt to use the other to fill internal voids. Here's the brutal truth no one wants to admit. For most people, love is an elegant word for escape from loneliness, escape from existential anxiety, or temporary relief from internal emptiness. Think about your own experiences. How many times have you felt more attracted to someone precisely when you were feeling most insecure about yourself? How many times have you interpreted another person's attention as validation that you had value? How many times have you confused the neurotic need to be desired with true love? Jung went even deeper in this analysis. He identified that many relationships are based on projections. That is, we project onto others what we cannot see or accept in ourselves. Jung analyst Marie-Louise von Franz explains that what is projected, when examined more closely, is not just a memory image of the father, but represents the authoritarian tendency of the child themselves. In other words, you don't fall in love with the real person. You fall in love with the projection of your own undeveloped aspects. You seek in the other the courage you can't find in yourself, the creativity you've repressed, the freedom you don't allow yourself to have, the peace you can't create internally. And when the real person, with their limitations, complexities, and humanity inevitably destroys this projection, you feel betrayed or disillusioned. But the truth is, you never loved the person. You loved your own fantasy projected onto them. Observe this with surgical precision. A healthy and happy relationship must be, above all, a highly productive bond. A bond in which each person has overcome their voids and dependencies. Do you understand what this means? It means that emotionally immature people cannot love. They can only need. And need is not love, no matter how romantic our culture tries to make it seem. Need is about scarcity. Love is about abundance. Need is about what you can receive. Love is about what you can give. Need makes the other responsible for your happiness. Love makes you responsible for contributing to the other's happiness. But there's an even deeper level to this illusion, one that goes straight to the heart of the modern human condition. But there's an even deeper level to this illusion, one that goes straight to the heart of the modern human condition. While you can rationally know that person isn't good for you, but still feel compulsively attracted to them, the answer is neurochemical, and it's more frightening than you imagine. When you're in love, your brain is literally in a state of chemical dependency. Dopamine, oxytocin, adrenaline, and other substances create a neurological cocktail that's practically identical to what happens with drug addiction. Research shows that love has the potential to be addictive, provoking passion through the release of dopamine and other substances that generate feelings of reward and pleasure. This means that when you're in love, you're not thinking clearly, you're literally intoxicated. And like any addict, you develop tolerance. You need increasingly larger doses of the drug, attention, validation, emotional intensity to feel the same pleasure. When the person isn't available, you go into withdrawal, anxiety, depression, obsessive thoughts, compulsive behaviors. Fromm identified this as one of the main distortions of modern love. He wrote, "Immature love says, I love you because I need you. Mature love says, I need you because I love you." Do you see the brutal difference? In the first case, you use the person as a drug to relieve your internal neediness. In the second, you choose the person from a place of personal fullness. But here's the most disturbing part. Our culture romanticizes precisely the symptoms of emotional dependency. Jealousy is called passion. Obsession is called true love. Possessiveness is called care. Control is called protection. Bauman observed this dynamic with devastating precision. It's a mistake to believe that the experience of relating superficially will generate experience for a lasting relationship. Relating superficially teaches you to be better at it every day, while the experience of making it last is only acquired by making it last. In other words, the more you treat relationships as disposable products, the less capable you become of creating deep and lasting connections. And this creates a terrible downward spiral. You seek relationships to alleviate your loneliness, but you approach these relationships in a way that guarantees they'll be superficial and temporary. This increases your loneliness, which makes you seek more relationships in the same dysfunctional way. It's a vicious cycle that keeps you eternally needy, eternally searching, eternally unsatisfied. Jung called this being trapped in a complex and unconscious emotional pattern that dominates your behavior without you realizing it. His studies on the collective unconscious revealed that many of our romantic behaviors are actually manifestations of primitive archetypes that no longer serve the modern world. You're being controlled by impulses you don't even recognize as your own. But there's still a deeper layer to this illusion, one that goes straight to the heart of who you really are. Wayne Tibetan, there's still a deeper layer to this illusion, one that goes straight to the heart of who you really are. Who are you when you're not measuring your worth by the amount of attention you receive? If you struggle to answer these questions, you're not alone. The vast majority of people have lost contact with their authentic identity precisely because they learned to define themselves through relationships. Fromm called this receptive orientation, a life approach where you expect love, happiness, and meaning to come from outside. He observed that the inability to act spontaneously, to express what one genuinely feels and thinks, and the resulting need to present a pseudo-self to oneself and others, are the roots of feelings of unhappiness and weakness. This means you've created a false version of yourself based on what you think others want to see. And this false version has become so convincing that you yourself have forgotten who you really are underneath the mask. Jung had an even more radical perspective on this. He believed that the main task of human beings in this life is to give birth to themselves, a process he called individuation. This process necessarily involves separating from collective expectations and discovering your unique essence. But here's the problem. If you don't know who you are, how can you consciously choose whom to love? If you don't have a solid identity, how can you create a relationship based on real compatibility instead of neurotic need? The answer is you can't. And this explains why so many relationships follow the same destructive pattern. You fall in love with the initial chemical intensity. Then when that intensity diminishes, as it always does, you feel bored or incompatible with the person. So you break up and look for someone new who can recreate that intensity. You're literally addicted to the initial phase of attraction, because it's the only moment where you feel something like a defined identity, even though this identity is completely based on another person's reactions. Bauman identified this as one of the central characteristics of liquid love. He observed that in liquid modern society, the solidification of love doesn't depend on surrendering to the other as it should be, but rather on both parties taking advantage of each other as it really is. In other words, modern relationships are often transactions disguised as romance. You offer validation, companionship, and sex in exchange for emotional security, social status, and relief from loneliness. This isn't love. This is an emotional business. And like any business, when one party feels they're not getting an adequate return on investment, the contract is broken. Fromm knew this transactional approach was the antithesis of true love. He wrote, "If a person loves only one other person and is indifferent to the rest of their fellow beings, their love is not love, but a symbiotic affection or an enlarged egoism. True love emerges from a general capacity to love, a life orientation based on abundance, generosity, and authentic connection with existence." But this brings us to the most important question of all. How do you escape this prison? But this brings us to the most important question of all. How do you escape this prison? It's a process of personal revolution that will challenge everything you believe about love, relationships, and your own identity. Are you ready to discover how truly free people experience love? First, you need to accept a brutal truth. You cannot truly love while trying to escape from yourself. Any relationship you form from a place of neediness will inevitably be an attempt to use another person to feel complete. Fromm was categorical about this. Paradoxically, the ability to be alone is the condition for the ability to love. This means that before you can love someone, you need to learn to be interesting company for yourself. You need to develop a rich, complex, and satisfying relationship with your own mind, your own emotions, your own thoughts. Jung called this developing the function of self-observation. He believed that self-knowledge wasn't an intellectual luxury, but a fundamental necessity for anyone who wanted to live authentically and maturely. But how do you do this practically? Start observing your romantic patterns without judgment. When you feel attracted to someone, ask yourself, what am I really looking for in this person? What internal void am I trying to fill? What part of myself am I projecting onto them? Second step, develop a life that's interesting, even when you're alone. As Fromm observed, love is energy. It's an impulse that encourages us to mobilize, to express ourselves, to create, but this energy only emerges when you have your basic needs for self-esteem and purpose satisfied internally. This doesn't mean becoming antisocial or avoiding relationships. It means developing a solid foundation of identity that doesn't depend on external validation. Third step, learn to distinguish between need and choice. When you feel attraction for someone, ask yourself, do I want to be with this person because they add something valuable to my already satisfying life? Or because I need them to feel complete? The difference is the difference between freedom and emotional slavery. Jung had a fascinating perspective on this. He believed that mature relationships were those where two individuated people consciously chose to create something together, instead of using each other to avoid loneliness or insecurity. Fourth step, accept that true love requires vulnerability, not performance. As Fromm wrote, care and responsibility are constituent elements of love, but without respect and knowledge of the beloved person, love deteriorates into domination and possessiveness. This means you need to be willing to be seen in your complete humanity, including your flaws, fears, and imperfections. Fifth step, understand that mature love is a verb, not a noun. It's not something you find or that happens to you. It's something you choose to do, day after day, even when you don't feel like it. Fromm was revolutionary in defining love as an art that needs to be practiced. Like any other art, loving requires conscious effort and discipline. True love is a capacity that needs to be worked on daily. This involves overcoming selfishness and the ability to genuinely care about the other's well-being. But there's something even deeper in this awakening process. The freedom to choose consciously. When you finally break the chains of emotional dependency and develop a mature relationship with yourself, something extraordinary happens. You become capable of consciously choosing how, when, with whom to share your life. You stop being a victim of your neurotic needs and become the conscious architect of your romantic experience. This changes everything. Instead of feeling attracted to people who activate your psychological complexes, you feel attracted to people who genuinely add value to your life. Instead of interpreting love as emotional intensity, you recognize love as consistency, care, and mutual growth. Bauman observed that people who manage to transcend to liquid love develop what he called solid connections, relationships based on conscious commitment instead of unconscious need. These people understand that lifelong commitments only become valuable when made from a place of freedom, not dependency. Jung had an even more radical vision. He believed that when two truly individuated people meet, they can create something that transcends both, a form of love that serves not only themselves but the evolution of human consciousness as a whole. But here's the part that will challenge everything you've learned about romance. This type of love looks nothing like what you see in movies. It's not obsessive, dramatic, or intense. It's calm, stable, and deeply satisfying. There are no butterflies in your stomach because there's no anxiety. There's no jealousy because there's no possessiveness. There's no drama because there are no unconscious projections creating imaginary conflicts. There are just two people who consciously chose to share their lives because it serves the highest interests of both. Fromm described this as productive love, a form of relationship that generates growth, creativity, and well-being for everyone involved. He observed that love is the only sane and satisfactory answer to the problem of human existence. But this brings us to the final question, the question that determines whether you'll continue being an emotional slave or become truly free. Sure, the choice that defines your life. Now you know the truth. You understand that what our culture calls romantic love is often a sophisticated form of emotional dependency. You comprehend that emotionally immature people cannot love, they can only need. You recognize that the capacity to truly love emerges only when you've developed a mature relationship with yourself. So the question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Will you continue pursuing the fantasy of romantic love, knowing now that it's an illusion that keeps you trapped in cycles of neediness and dependency? Or will you have the courage to embark on the most difficult and most rewarding journey a human being can make? The journey back to yourself. Jung knew that most people would choose the illusion. He observed that the main task of human beings in this life is to give birth to themselves, but recognized that few have the courage to face this process. Why? Because it meant giving up all emotional crutches, all romantic distractions, all escape mechanisms they used to avoid facing their own existential loneliness. Fromm was even more direct. The main task of human beings in this life is to give birth to themselves. But he also knew this required a type of courage our culture doesn't teach. The courage to be complete without needing anyone. This doesn't mean becoming antisocial or avoiding relationships. It means becoming so whole, so interesting, so satisfied with your own company that you only choose to share your life with people who genuinely add value to the experience you've already created for yourself. It means stopping looking for someone to save you and becoming someone worthy of being chosen by an equally evolved person. It means accepting that true love never requires self-abandonment, and that any relationship that demands you deny parts of yourself to be accepted isn't love. It's manipulation disguised as romance. Bauman warned us that we live in an era where uncertainty is the most attenuating aspect of relationship longevity. But the real uncertainty isn't in relationships. It's in your lack of clarity about who you are and what you really want. When you know exactly who you are, when you've developed a rich and satisfying relationship with yourself, uncertainty disappears. You no longer need to guess if someone will love you, because you already love yourself. You no longer need to fear being abandoned, because you're excellent company for yourself. And paradoxically, it's exactly when you stop desperately needing love that you become truly lovable. Onto your portsley then was it again a palda, albeit the transformation awaiting you. Imagine for a moment what your life would be like if you no longer felt that desperate neediness for romantic validation. Imagine waking up in the morning feeling complete, interested in your own projects, excited about your own possibilities. Imagine talking to attractive people without the anxiety of trying to impress them, without calculating every word to generate maximum possible interest. Imagine being in a relationship where you don't feel jealous, don't need to control the other's behavior, don't live in fear of being abandoned. Imagine truly loving someone, not because you need that person to feel complete, but because you consciously choose to share your fullness with them. This isn't a fantasy. It's the natural result of applying the insights I've shared with you. Fromm dedicated his life to proving this was possible. He demonstrated that when a person develops what he called productive orientation, a life approach based on creating value instead of extracting validation, they become capable of forming genuinely loving relationships. Jung went even further. He believed that truly individuated people not only experience love more deeply, but also contribute to the evolution of human consciousness as a whole. When you stop draining energy from others and start radiating your own light, you become part of the solution to the collective problem of emotional neediness. You become a living example that it's possible to be happy alone and even happier when you consciously choose to share that happiness with someone special. But real transformations never happen through theoretical insights. They happen through consistent practices that gradually reorganize your psychological orientation. Protocol for emotional freedom. If you've made it this far, it's because part of you is already ready for this transformation. Part of you already understands that continuing in the same pattern of emotional dependency will only generate more suffering. So let me give you a practical protocol to start this journey today. First, make a brutal inventory of your romantic patterns. Write a list of all the people you've felt intensely attracted to in recent years. For each one, identify what internal void were you trying to fill through that person. What aspects of yourself did you project onto them? What did you expect to receive that you couldn't give to yourself? Second, develop a life that's interesting even in the absence of romance. Fromm observed that people capable of mature love have passions, purposes, and interests that exist independently of relationships. Find something that genuinely fascinates you. Art, science, spirituality, entrepreneurship, and dedicate yourself to it with the same intensity you use to dedicate to the search for love. Third, practice conscious solitude. Jung believed that the capacity to be alone without feeling lonely was fundamental to psychological development. Dedicate at least 1 hour per day to being completely alone, without digital distractions, just observing your own thoughts and feelings without judgment. Fourth, question your romantic impulses in real time. The next time you feel attracted to someone, pause and ask, is this attraction coming from a place of abundance or neediness? Do I want this person because they're genuinely compatible with me, or because I need the validation they can give me? Fifth, redefine your expectations about relationships. Stop looking for someone to complete you, and start looking for someone who is equally complete and consciously chooses to create something beautiful together with you. Sixth, accept that this process will be uncomfortable. As Fromm observed, the task we need to give ourselves is not to feel secure, but to be able to tolerate insecurity. When you stop using relationships as a drug for existential anxiety, you'll have to face that anxiety directly. 7th, cultivate love for yourself before trying to love anyone else. And I'm not talking about superficial self-esteem or positive affirmations. I'm talking about developing genuine appreciation for your own company, deep respect for your own values, authentic admiration for your unique potential. When you can look in the mirror and feel the same kind of love you expect to receive from another person, you'll have broken the cycle of emotional dependency forever. What to say? It's a moment of decision, so here we are. At the moment of decision, so here we are. At the moment that defines everything. You have two options before you. First option, close this video, return to your normal life, and continue pursuing the same type of love that has left you unsatisfied. Continue using relationships as a drug to alleviate your internal neediness. Continue waiting for someone to appear and solve the problems only you can solve. This is the easier option in the short term, and it's the option 99% of people choose. Second option, accept that everything you believed about love was wrong. Accept that you need to develop a mature relationship with yourself before you can truly love anyone else. Accept that this journey will be difficult, lonely, and sometimes frightening. But also accept that it's the only way to experience the kind of love you really desire. A love based on conscious choice, instead of neurotic need. Jung knew that most people would choose the first option. He observed that the conditions for creativity are being intrigued, concentrating, accepting conflict and tension, being born every day, feeling a sense of being, but recognized that few are willing to face this level of uncertainty and growth. Fromm was even more direct. There is perhaps no phenomenon that contains as much destructive feeling as moral indignation, which allows envy or hatred to be committed under the pretext of virtue. Most people prefer to blame others for their romantic problems instead of taking responsibility for their own transformation. But you're not most people. If you were, you wouldn't have made it this far. So I ask you directly, looking into your eyes, are you ready to be misunderstood, rejected, or even criticized by those who still live in the illusion of romantic love? Are you ready to give up all the emotional crutches you've used to avoid facing your own existential loneliness? Are you ready to become so complete, so interesting, so satisfied with yourself that you only accept relationships that genuinely add value to the extraordinary life you've already created? If your answer is yes, then you're ready for the most important journey of your life. If your answer is no, that's fine. At least now you know you're consciously choosing to remain in prison. But if your answer is, I don't know, but I want to find out, then you've already taken the first step. As Fromm said, only the person who has faith in themselves is capable of having faith in others. And as Jung observed, who looks outside, dreams, who looks inside, awakens. True love is waiting for you on the other side of your own transformation. The question is, will you have the courage to go find it? Your declaration of emotional independence. If you've made it this far, it's because something fundamental has changed within you. You can no longer pretend you don't know the truth about the difference between true love and emotional dependency, disguised as romance. Now you have a choice to make, and this choice will determine not only how you experience relationships, but how you experience life as a whole. So tell me in the comments, are you ready to choose emotional freedom instead of the security of dependency? Are you willing to trade the addictive intensity of neurotic love for the deep peace of mature love? Choose one of these phrases and write it in the comments to declare your intention. I choose to love myself before trying to love anyone else. I choose conscious solitude instead of desperate company. I choose to be complete alone, and even more complete when I choose to share my life. And remember, the next video in this series will explore even deeper territory, how to identify and break the unconscious patterns that make you repeat the same romantic mistakes indefinitely. Because understanding the illusion of romantic love is just the first step. The second step is discovering why you continue being attracted to people who activate your deepest wounds. See you there, and congratulations for having the courage to question one of our culture's most well-protected illusions. You'll never be the same again. Você sente isso ou não sente? Essa inquietação constante em seus relacionamentos, como se houvesse algo fundamentalmente errado, mas você não consegue identificar o que.